My friend D showed me a book that contained photographs of paintings of cattle with U-shaped horns reaching up above their head. A book written by James Millart, a British archaeologist who also became famous as a tomb raider after he excavated the ruins of Katal Huyuk in Anatolia, Turkey, which flourished around 7000 BC and is one of the most famous historical sites in the world. Looking through the book, I thought that although I'd lost interest in many things, I still felt an interest in prehistoric remains, among some other things. I'd thought a few times before, while passing by a sign indicating prehistoric remains somewhere, that I should go see them someday, and yet I've never yet been to a prehistoric site. Once somewhere in Korea, my friend and I saw a sign by the roadside indicating prehistoric remains and entered a narrow mountain path, but didn't see anything that could be deemed prehistoric remains. But there was a little waterfall at the end of the path which wasn't flowing and seemed to have something wrong with it. But it wasn't a waterfall requiring treatment or repair due to indisposition, derangement, defect, or mechanical failure, and it was completely frozen in the icy weather. The water beneath the waterfall, on which we were standing, was completely frozen as well, and it seemed that the fish in the water too were frozen, but the ice was too thick for us to be able to see them. Looking at the waterfall, my friend and I said that it was too bad that you couldn't have a job in which you diagnosed, treated, and operated on a waterfall by putting a frozen waterfall on an IV or repairing it by cutting and welding. That if you could have such a job, you could go to New Zealand or Norway, where there were so many waterfalls that you got sick of them and would then study new methods of treatment or repair for waterfalls. And that it was too bad that you couldn't put up a sign in front of a waterfall saying under treatment or under repair, followed by the words, "Do not talk to this waterfall. This waterfall hates more than anything to be spoken to. If you want to speak, talk to yourself, not aloud. If you have an inquiry concerning this waterfall, find out for yourself. If you can't find out for yourself, stop being curious. But if you're still curious, write down your inquiry in a letter to the waterfall, in words that the waterfall will understand, or, if that's not possible, then in words that the waterfall won't understand, and send it through mail. And do not drive a nail into or beat the waterfall with personal feelings. But if you have been feeling down for the past year for no clear reason, then you may curse the waterfall in words that aren't too harsh, or throw tomatoes at it." We lamented that we hadn't yet heard of a biological or engineering research that had been conducted on waterfalls for the purposes of treatment or repair, and we sounded like people deranged from frozen heads. My friend, who after studying philosophy in Germany had caused some kind of trouble and was deported and returned to Korea, was the most abnormal person I knew, and the only thing he was doing at the time was, each day, driving his old father, who had dementia and thought he was still running a company, to the company where he'd worked for decades, and which was now being run by his other son, then driving him back home after he ate his lunch, and his father had been doing for years. And my friend said that his study of philosophy in Germany helped him in his endeavor, but not at all in anything else, and he didn't do anything else, and the only thing he hoped to do was go on helping his father, who had dementia and thought he was still running a company, stay alive, and go to work and come home. The waterfall, whose column of water was frozen as it was, seemed to be telling us to just look at it, not climb it, without looking at it for too long. But if we really wanted to look at it for a long time, we could, and yet it wasn't ever going to reveal another aspect of itself simply because we looked at it for a long time. But if we looked at it for a really long time, then it might end up revealing an aspect of itself which to itself was unknown, perhaps a rather negative aspect. And I thought there was no need for us to go so far as to see a rather negative aspect of a frozen waterfall, although I was curious as to what a rather negative aspect of the frozen waterfall could be. And we agreed that the waterfall we were looking at must have existed long before prehistoric times, but technically could not be seen as a prehistoric remain. And we also agreed that we should get out of that place before we froze to death. But we didn't leave the place right away, which wasn't because we felt we should think a little more about whether to freeze to death or not. The frozen waterfall, though it was of course a product of nature, looked like a piece of installation art, and it seemed that if two men froze and turned into statues standing in front of it, they could be a sort of exhibit along with the frozen waterfall, a work of art created by nature and humans together. Looking at the waterfall, I thought of Andy Warhol. Not the Warhol who, though he didn't create a work of art titled Waterfall, did create Daisy Waterfall. a work of art consisting of a repeated arrangement of photographs of daisies on a wall behind a wall of falling water columns. But instead a very old and short Caucasian man with white hair, and I stooped back I'd seen at a museum and whose age Warhol might be around if he were still alive, and who seemed for a moment like Warhol in reincarnation. The very old man was standing next to a work of art, looking at the caption as if he couldn't remember the title of his own work, which was a silkscreen piece titled Electric Chair. The scene left a deeper impression on me than any other work of art I'd seen before. In my mind, I signed my name in a little corner of the frozen waterfall, and thought that when I was very old, with a stooped back and white hair, I could come to the waterfall with someone in midwinter, and show them the frozen waterfall, and tell them that this was the broken electric chair I created long ago. But I had no intention at all of living to such an age. I had been living out my declining years for so long that I could hardly remember when it was that I began thinking that I was living out long declining years, and now I wanted to shorten those long declining years as much as possible. A young couple showed up then, a man and a woman who didn't look like people who'd come to see prehistoric remains. They were fully equipped with helmets, ropes, climbing irons, hammers, and headlamps, among other things, as if they were setting out to conquer Mount Everest. And in fact, they looked in a way like people who'd been met with disaster on Mount Everest several days before. We just looked at each other from a distance without saying hello, and it seemed only natural not to say hello. It seemed that from the moment they first saw us, they didn't like us, standing in front of the waterfall without any equipment, and with our hands in our pockets, and with no thought of climbing the icy wall. And we too didn't like them from the moment we first saw them approaching the little frozen waterfall, dressed as if they were about to conquer Mount Everest. I knew that they were up to